At dawn the door was open and the lamp was still smoking, and no one stood in the little kitchen. Rain had been there in the night. It left its damp folded into the curtains, and it left its smell inside the paper on the table. The paper belonged to a notebook ruled in blue. The hand that filled it was small and exact and unafraid of numbers. Distances from the cooper's shop to the mill, in paces measured 3 times. The space between the Zimmerman roof and the first shingle that always lifted in wind, written to a finger's width. The count of steps from the pump to the plank, that gives under Mr. Dietrich's weight with a note that says left foot falters every third. Snatches of talk copied line for line from the back pew, and the alley and the store where the clerk thinks no one listens. Names written once, then again, then crossed out with a single neat stroke, as if to say this one has already reached the hour I named. The room did not look stolen. The parents had not left in ruin. A cup half full, a shawl thrown across a chair, a handkerchief folded and still damp with wash water. On the table a pencil sharpened, thin as a needle, and beside it a scrap with a child's problem worked out backward, so the answer came first, and the rule arrived after. She could tell you the day of any date. Any year a man might fling from a cart seat while passing. She would turn it in her mind and say it quiet, and then say the day, as if she were naming a friend at the door. She could watch the way a man lifted his heel from plank to plank, and say the hour his breath would lift from his chest and never come back. She sat with her hands still in her lap, and repeated your argument from last month, without changing a single word. She placed her finger on a map she had drawn in the flyleaf, and traced you a path through the ward that would keep you safe if you were wise, and would lead you through smoke if you were not. She is 11. Her name is Emma Richter. She is the girl the town called clever, until clever began to point where blood would flow. Stay with me. Subscribe if you dare to uncover more forgotten tragedies. The pages I am turning now were not meant to live this long. The words I am about to say were never meant to be spoken by anyone who wished to go on sleeping. The night before, 3 people died in separate places, and not one of those places surprised her. She had written them without drama. She had marked them the way a carpenter marks the length of a board before he raises his saw. Mr. Dietrich on the river planks at 8:23. Mr. Kellner behind the baker's oven when envy turns hand to iron. Mr. Zimmerman in the room where the chimney pulls hard because the draw is split and because the man drinks lamp oil when the beer runs thin. The ink sits dry against the page as if calamity were only an answer finally reached. The first time she did the day trick, the neighbors smiled and the brewer's wife clapped. Give us the weekday for the birth of the mayor. She spoke it as if it were written on the inside of her eyelids. Give us the weekday for the harvest 3 years hence, when the new mill opens. She gave it, and then said the hour the bells would ring, and then told them their bells would be late. They laughed and said she was blessed. They said God had decided to nest a clock in a child's head. The first time she repeated a conversation word for word from a week before, the men in the shop fell quiet and felt their faces heat. She did the voices. She did the pause. She did the part where a man leaned near the cooper's bench and whispered an unkindness about his friend, then lifted his eyes when the door opened. That man went home and told his wife that the Richter girl had something wrong in her head and that Hinrich must keep her out of sight. He said this in English and then in German, as if one language might save him from the other. The first time she said the hour of a death, she said it almost kindly. She said it at their own table with her hand, resting on her mother's sleeve. She said, Mr. Dietrich will die by the river at 23 minutes past 8 tomorrow night, and his watch will show it, and no one will believe the watch either. She said it because the change in his step has a number in it, and because he has switched the hand that holds the bottle, and because he shook the bottle twice before he drank, and he has never done that. Her mother told her to hush, and her father told her that numbers and pity should not meet. They did not sleep. At the hour she named, men came up from the river, and the blue of their coats looked wet under the lamp, even after they had taken them off. The policeman who first listened to her listened, as men listen when something might be useful. He took his hat off at their door and begged for the kindness of one more detail. He left one day with a ring he said had no rightful owner, and returned it to a girl who had stopped speaking. He left another day with nothing and returned a handkerchief, and would not say why. He began to look at the child as if her eyes could write him a report, while his hands stayed clean. They called her a prodigy in the first week, a savant in the second, a witch by the third, when the baker found Mr. Kellner where no one should have been, and found blood where no one wished to see it. The Lutheran pastor placed two words beside each other and asked his own heart which to choose: temptation, gift. By morning he crossed both out in the book, where he kept his thoughts, and chose a third: burden. There is a page where she writes nothing but distances, between door and stoop, between stoop and curb, between curb and the place where Mr. Zimmerman stops to cough and sets his hand against brick every time he returns from the yard. She has written the tilt of his shoulders and the way he turns his head when he feels the draw in his chimney pull wrong. She has sketched a little square above the stovepipe where soot has begun to eat its way into lime. She has written a word for thirst and another for fire, and put a line under both and added them, and right of the line she has drawn a skull no bigger than a fingernail. It is not a child's joke. It looks like work. Hinrich and Greta Richter came across the water in a season when salt felt like snow on the mouth, and when men remembered to tie everything valuable to everything else, because a sea will take what it wants. Emma came early and drew her first breath between two storms and below a ceiling that groaned as if the ribs of the ship knew how to count. When she learned words, she used them as if they were beads on a string. When she learned numbers, she wore them. By 4 she had learned that everything has an edge, and that every edge can be measured, and that if you do not measure it, it will measure you. She wrote the days of the week for years long gone, as if they were neighbors passing the window. She wrote the days for years she would never live in. She taught herself to hear the week in a date because someone had left an old almanac on a trunk, and the perpetual calendar in the back spoke to her like a catechism. She taught herself to reckon distance by the count of breaths it took to cross it, because everything in that ward repeated in loops tight as watch springs. Men woke to the same bell. Women turned the same handles. Horses stopped at the same rail. It would be sweet to say that the notebooks stay among innocent things. They do not. She copied talk from places where no child should sit, and she sat there anyway. She drew the weight of a fight by the pressure it left in a wall where she placed her hand. She kept a column for changes that do not announce themselves. Mr. Dietrich changed his bottle hand. Mrs. Weber pinned her hair with the violet comb she reserves for Sundays on a Friday at noon. Mr. Kellner wore a hat brim with a little scuff on the left side that did not live there the day before. She wrote small arrows after each and nested them under the names like birds building on thin branches. Dr. Friedrich Müller came with a physician's calm and a gentleman's curiosity. He brought his slate. He brought his little hammer for knees. He asked how she knew the day of a date and expected a rule. He asked how she knew a death and expected a confession. She answered as if he had asked what she wished to eat. She said the day lives inside the date, and a body tells the hour it will fail, and you can hear it in steps, and in the way a hand fails to meet a door, if the mind is busy with another door. He wrote hypermnesia with a steadiness that amused no one. He wrote obsession and fear, and then tore that leaf and burned it, and then burned half his other notes, and felt colder for it. After Mr. Zimmerman died, the house tried to hold its breath and could not. Smoke wrote figures against its ceilings for days. The wife moved to a sister's. The ward walked with its eyes down. The cooper nailed his shutters, while the nails shook between his fingers. The girl wrote in her book a single line that said nothing more would be taken on this street for a month, if the people moved their clocks ahead by one rung. It looked like madness to all who saw it. It looked like math to the one who wrote it. Then they began to say that she forced the world to behave by naming it. That, if she had kept her mouth shut, the oven would have stayed clean, and the chimney would have held, and the planks would have passed under a drunk, without catching him at the ankle, and making him fall. Men love the comfort of blaming a child when a city breaks its own bones. They called it curse, while using the word science to light their charges. And yet who writes a curse in a hand so neat, and leaves it on a table with a cup still half full? Who puts a pencil down as carefully as if placing a sleeping bird, and walks away very early so as not to wake the house? Who takes nothing that can be sold and leaves nothing that can be explained? This is the truth that makes a ward talk under its breath for a generation. The Richters left before sunrise, and used no street where a neighbor could wave and keep them. They left a notebook and a kitchen that looked as if a family still lived there, and the smell of lamp smoke that comes when a wick has been pinched too quickly. They left distances and sums, and the day for the date of a wedding that never happened. They left a page that ends at the word because, and no reason after it. You will be told that she disappeared because clever burns itself out. You will be told that the police moved them along for the sake of peace. You will be told that the deaths are ordinary and that a town made them extraordinary with a girl as its excuse. You will be told this, and you will sit with the book, and you will feel a place on one page that is pressed a little deeper than the rest, where the hand that wrote must have pressed too hard on an hour that would not move. You will run your finger there and feel the groove, and you will not know why your breath has grown shallow. Why did this happen? Why was it erased from history? The questions sit now where the cup sits on the table. They leave a round dark mark, and it does not fade. The policeman who once asked for her help left a handkerchief here, with the smell of river water. The doctor left a curl of paper, ash caught in a crack of the floorboard. The landlord left a new lock on the door, and a lie for every tenant who asked what had happened. The ward left its shutters closed a week. The walls remembered. Stay with me. Subscribe if you dare to uncover more forgotten tragedies. Milwaukee wears a clean face, in the year written at the top of the ledger. 1873. A city squared by the lake and the river. Cream brick stacked into tidy rows. Boardwalks nailed across mud where wagons used to sink. Breweries breathing a sweet yeast perfume that carries through alleys and along the water. Bells strike the hour and sound more honest than men. The German tongue fills courtyards and kitchens, and the new sidewalks carry boots that remember another shore. On paper everything is right. The Milwaukee Sentinel praises industry and mocks fairground mesmerists. Der Herald prints fracture that looks like carved wood and prints sermons on duty and order for parents who still think in Hanover lines and Mecklenburg lines. Sistine marks Lutheran registers baptisms in a hand, so straight you would think God himself held the pen through a clerk. The city directory lists coopers and smiths, and teachers and doctors, and puts each in his place, as if the grid of streets promised a grid in souls. Walk the ward, and you meet the respectable surface. Emma Richter sits at a bench that smells of oak and pitch and turns staves with a patience that belongs to older cities. Greta sweeps before breakfast and folds breadcloth with a reverence learned where winters had sharper teeth. They have a little apartment above the shop where the lamp suits the size of the room, and the kettle sings in the same corner every morning. Neighbors knock and leave crusts or a jar and tell a joke that has already walked the block twice today. Children run to the pump and slap hands against the wet plank as if the board might clap back. Everybody nods to the hour when the brewery whistle blows. The sound ties them like ribbon. The child sits in this order and lets it settle around her. She was born on moving water in 61, when men spoke of war and the sky, and of storms that arriving families try not to see. Her mother says the ship ribs counted for her in those nights. Her father says the sea beat a time that lodged in her ear. She came early and lived. That is the first arithmetic. She came small and watched. That is the second. Milwaukee counts whether anyone notices. The cooper counts hoops and inches across staves. The brewer counts minutes between mash and boil. Teachers count slates and chalk, and small hands with ink on them. Bakers count loaves and look at the room as if it too were bread that must rise. The bells count the city into hours. The trains count it into distances. Underneath all of that, the old world counts still, in the heads of those who carried it. A trunk under the Richter bed holds a prayer book, printed in Heil in the 18th century, with a perpetual calendar at the back. Saints and seasons laid across weeks like lattice. A Magdeburg arithmetic primer sits beside it with multiplication rhymes that cling to a tongue, even when a tongue crosses oceans. The small catechism speaks in numbered questions to those who learned to love order the way one loves a window that holds in winter. Almanacs that journeyed over water promise, you can know your feasts if you know your week. A child reads these things until numbers begin to taste like sugar and salt do to other children. The city never stopped adopting those old habits. In the year 1700, Protestants in the German states accepted the new calendar rule and learned again how to move days like bricks and to trust a man with chalk who can shift a Sunday by law. That memory survives without words. A week is a made thing. A date is a shape you can place inside your head. Milwaukee has only had decades to build itself. The habits it rests on are centuries old. They push up under the cream brick like roots that refuse to rot. The ward looks tidy because its messes are small and daily and can be washed by women who know how to scrub. Ashpans, spilled beer, curdled milk from a bad morning. If you list each and cross it off, you can tell yourself the city is fixed. That is how the papers speak. That is how the committees speak. Even the schools speak with crisp chalk lines. On the wall hangs a timetable as handsome as a hymn. 8 recitation, 9 arithmetic, 10 copywork. And the teachers ask children to repeat days of week and months of year, as if the sound will nail them to the board forever. Then the panic arrives like a man who knocks without removing his hat. Banks crack. Shops pull shutters down early and keep them down. Men stand and smoke outside and do not look at one another. They stroke their beards with thumbs that feel a new pattern in their own bodies. Boots scuff different. Laughs cut off. The ward does not say the word ruin. The ward says we will continue. But the loops that kept the city steady loosen. The hour that folded itself in daily now troubles the air like a thread caught on a nail. This is how a child hears what no one else does. There are 2 cities now. The printed one and the walking one. The printed one lists a cooper beside a brewer and a pastor beside a physician, and the lines look neat as sash cords. The walking one is made of tempos. Heels on boards. Hands on railings. Heads turned a degree too slow. The count of steps between shop and tavern stays the same, and then does not. A man who hums always breaks the tune 1 bar earlier than he did last week. A wife ties her hair the same, and then not. The breaths of those who carry debt shorten in front of thresholds they used to cross without thought. Milwaukee's surface remains a lesson in aspiration. There are clubs where men speak of improvement and call themselves by names borrowed from the old country. The Engerbund sings in sweet harmony and holds printed programs that say music will cure the homesick mind. The Turnverein flexes discipline for young bodies and writes rules meant to shape time itself. A sheet with marching orders sits on tables while boys jump a beam and are told to count 3 and 3 and 3. The city likes to imagine that if it keeps count itself, then nothing unruly will count it. The newspapers play their parts in this performance. The Sentinel runs a short column that likes to kick at wonders. Snake handlers, spirit trumpets, girls who can add faster than men. It laughs and pats Milwaukee on the head and says we are sensible here. Der Herald carries essays on the importance of rote and the dangers of superstition. It warns that certain families allow too much of the old world to leak into the new. Between advertisements for beer and boots sits a letter to the editor praising the child, who recites multiplication tables without pause. Praise is safe when numbers behave. Praise breaks when numbers tell the hour of a man's fall. Even in the respectable frame, watchers keep small private books. A schoolmistress writes in March that a little girl in her room likes to count things that other children ignore. Knots in boards. Stitches along cuffs. Cracks in the window ledge. She thinks it is a phase. She thinks the girl will choose dolls. She leaves the line in her diary and draws a thin smear with her finger as if to rub it away, and the paper takes the mark and keeps it. A copy has survived by luck. The ink looks wet forever. The old German habit of holding both piety and math in the same hand crosses the ocean intact. The catechism asks, "What is this?" and answers with numbers. The primer sings sums to the tune of church songs. A little volume of calendars sits beside a volume of sermons on the same shelf. Fathers beat a rhythm with fingers while claiming to speak only of Scripture. Mothers measure flour without looking at spoons and can tell when a week will break a child by the way the child looks out a window for too long. Numbers in this city are not just on signs. They are in posture. The year 83 wears Milwaukee loudly. By 73 it still has fresh edges. The cream brick stains beautifully in rain. The lake pulls fog up alleys and lays it against door frames. The river moves slow enough to trick men into unwisdom. The Menomonee Valley smells of coal and wet timber. The Third Ward is not yet ash, but the air remembers that cities on water burn with a hunger more efficient than in towns that sit inland. The people are proud of how often they say the word modern and how sure they are that modern will not throw stones at their old gods. Letters from the old country keep coming. A cousin writes from Bremen about a new printing of celestial tables that will let a farmer know what he must plant and when. An aunt writes about a devotion that relies on repeating a list 40 times and claims that repetition is the thing that makes a home strong. A grandfather still living in a village near Magdeburg sends a Rechenpfennig saved from his own school days and says a child should always keep a token like this in a pocket to be ready when figures ask to be solved. You hear the century before the last one creak inside these letters, and you feel it under the cream brick and beside the lake, and around the little kitchen where the notebook lies. On Sundays, St. Mark's marches children past windows full of boots and books. The hymn numbers on the board climb and drop, and the bored child learns to love the way numbers behave, even when the soul does not. At dismissal, boys and girls laugh and step from board to street, with the same spacing their parents used without knowing. A child like Emma counts those steps, because counting them calms the rush in the head that comes whenever people crowd a narrow place. A child like Emma learns the times for bells faster than she learns the words of sermons, because bells never lie unless someone wins them wrong. At the coast of the lake, the bridge throws a new pattern into days. Ships arrive and depart with their own music. The dock hands teach their bodies to predict when a line will snap by listening to the fibers sing. Families learn the smell that means rain, and the one that means the wind will cheat. The year begins to look different by water. A girl who was born on water does not forget this. She is always adding the fifth thing to the four things she can see. She is always subtracting a minute to get a safer walk home. Dr. Friedrich Mueller carries the respectable surface inside his coat and spreads it out on kitchen tables when people look ready to slip toward panic. He assures the ward that minds can do extraordinary things without help from heaven or its opposite. He tells a story about an English boy who could name dates without a book, and about a Frenchman who could multiply into the thousands while drunk. He says the brain is a creature made of grooves. He says some brains carve grooves faster. He does not say what happens when a groove becomes a river. The journals he reads come from cities far east and far west, and they are bound pretty in cloth. He flips to cases and pauses at the wonder and continues without weighing the dread. Milwaukee keeps records as if they will save it. Marriage registers, warehouse ledgers, dock logs, baptisms and deaths. The way the ward repeats its moving parts sorts those names into patterns that would be clear to anyone who cared to listen. Few care. The people are busy keeping upright. They move past clocks without looking at them. They cross planks without counting. They say their neighbors' names and do not ask what the names are made of. They wake and lay down and eat and finish the day without adding it to anything that might reveal sense. And yet there are scraps that call back from drawers. A dock ledger notes that Mr. Dietrich began to come home by a different span after a certain Monday. A counterboy writes that Mr. Kellner bought violet oil and paid in white coin instead of copper. A small torn piece of paper in a police book mentions a rumor of a ring put away where a ring does not belong. A landlord writes that a certain chimney draws too hard when the wind is east and says a repair is needed, and then buys nothing to mend it. Each scrap is a symbol without its grammar. People like Emma supply the grammar without trying. There is a rhyme children chant at the pump. Lines about days of the week and whether they bring luck. Sunday child blessed. Monday child fair. It does not matter which poem you think you remember. The words that survive into a city like this are the ones that can be counted on hands by any age. A teacher uses it to settle a room and forgets that she placed power into a circle when she did. A child fidgets and makes the tempo right. The room lifts and falls like a crowd on a ship. You want the respectable surface to be enough. You want the list of clubs and services and plans to be proof that the ward will not breed a mystery. You trust the papers to print it. You trust the church to hold it. You trust the physician to name it. You trust little rhythms to remain little. Then a girl draws the city, as if it were a web, and pulls a line, and a spider arrives where she says, and you understand that the surface was always a veil. In that year the panic rubs out too much sleep. Husbands who would never be in the wrong place, at the wrong hour, begin to register in a child's sums, as men who will be. Wives who never drop their eyes begin to drop them after lunch, and a girl who watches for a living makes a mark in a column, and no one knows she has done it. Bells still sound, and trains still run, and the newspaper still jokes, and the church still sings, and the children still laugh, and the surface holds with the brightness of fresh paint and the wariness of old wood. Through it the darker arithmetic rises little by little, like damp. Archival hands will tell you later that the truth was printed all along. That a column spoke of a savant in a boarding house on Mason Street. That an officer's log in a cabinet that got wet, said a child corrected him about a day of week, and turned out to be right. That an entry in St. Mark's ledger registering the baptism of Emma Richter places a smudge where a date should not have one, and that the smudge is human and old, and might be milk or might be tears. Records will pretend to answer you, and the answer will feel like water. Cool and unsustaining. There was a joke in those years about Germans counting. That a German can count his way through war and famine, and find a loaf at the end. It is the sort of joke that hurts twice. One, because it flatters the teller for not needing the trick. Two, because it hides envy inside a smile. A child who counts everything reveals what the joke does not intend. Counting is survival, and it is prophecy when you do it fast enough. You can still walk the grid where she lived and see how it trained a mind like hers to believe it could hold everything. Short blocks. Repeating storefronts. Corners with chalk ghosts on the brick, so that games can begin without a new line. Ruts where wagons take the same bend. Side doors with the same worn hinge. Steps the same height from house to house. Numbered even when numbers are not painted. There is no mystery here until there is. Then the city cannot say it did not know. It began with tricks the city could stomach. A small girl at the pump in the 3rd Ward, calling out the weekday for a date flung at her by a brewer with a grin. A child on a stoop repeating the last line of a hymn and counting the steps to the shop without looking down. She stood with a pail and a braid and eyes that did not startle. And when a man shouted the year of his wedding, she closed her lashes and turned a wheel in her mind and said, Thursday, as if she were only naming a neighbor. Men laughed and shook heads and said the word blessed. Women watched the stillness of her hands and said the word uncanny without moving their lips. Dr. Friedrich Müller watched too. He was a physician who liked clean terms and orderly books and the comfort of a diagnosis that made a house sit back down. He came with a slate and chalk, and a smile meant to be kind, and a pen knife for his quills, and the habit of ordering his thoughts with tidy headings. He asked Emma to work the day rule again, and again and again. She did it until his chalk broke, and the slate showed pale. Scratches where the circle had been rubbed too often. He asked how she did it, and she said the day lives inside the date. If you hold it right and the week speaks, if you listen behind the numbers rather than in front. He chuckled and wrote the word prodigy and the word savant on a paper he planned to burn before he slept. The first hour she named was spoken without pride. In their kitchen with a kettle making its small noise, and her mother setting a cup on a saucer, she said Mr. Dietrich will die at 23 minutes past 8 on the river planks, because his left foot pauses on every 3rd board now. And he has changed the hand that lifts his bottle, and he shook the bottle twice before he drank today, and he has never done that. Greta Richter said Emma hush, and set her palm on the girl's hair, as if a warm hand could calm a cold arithmetic. Hinrich Richter stared at the wall, where the lamplight made a ripple, and said numbers are not prophets and fathers, do not spread such words. But the hour came, and the men came up from the river with their hats in their hands, and a watch face caught the light under a lantern, and the tiny hand pointed where the girl had said it would. The policeman wrote accident in his book, and did not add the other thing. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. The stoop behind the bakery smelled of warm sugar and envy. Emma had said 2 days before that Mrs. Weber would be found there with Mr. Kellner on Friday, because her hair was pinned with a violet comb-chic the Sabbath, and this was Wednesday, and because Mr. Kellner's hat smelled of oil no wife in a block ever bought, and because he had taken 3 paces into shadow, and then taken 2 back. That made her a number. That told her certain things. Someone laughed and called her a parrot of gossip. Someone else looked at the girl's face and found no satisfaction there and felt sick. On Friday, the oven bricks were marked in a color that takes more than water to remove, and the alley sent up a shout that hit the windows on both sides. A husband came last and came with a knife he had never carried before, and the week broke its back. The newspaper printed a line about a domestic disturbance and set it in small type between the price of flour and a notice about a new pump. The ward tucked away the other part of the story, as if hiding a shard of glass in straw. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. Dr. Mueller returned with questions and the gentle aggression of a man who wants the world to be sensible. He asked Emma how she chose her hour and where she found her certainty. She said, "I do not choose, and there is no certainty. There is only listening." People turn into patterns when they are tired, and when they are happy, and when they are guilty, and when they are ready to stop. Their feet tell their minds what to do, and their hands show their hearts if you look long enough. If a man changes the hand that drinks, he has moved a number, and if he moves a number, he moves an hour, and if he moves an hour, the boards that carry him will know. He wrote in careful letters the word hypermnesia, and under it the phrase compulsive patterning. Then he set the paper aside, because he did not like the way his own hand was shaking. She came to him with a different kind of hour then. Mrs. Brennan will go to the river at night, with her shawl folded wrong and with her eyes fixed at a height that is not ordinary, and she will stand on the plank that gives milk when it rains, and she will think of stepping again, and there is an 87 chance she will do it. He told her numbers had no place in a matter like this, and began to put on his coat, and then took it off and sent Hinrich in his stead. Hinrich ran until he found the widow with her shawl folded wrong, and he stood beside her and spoke to her like a brother, and her breath slowed, and she set her hand on the rail, and then on her own chest, and then she stepped back and wiped her face, and said the word tomorrow as if it were a new color. Emma said in the morning that 87 had become 9, and then 3, and then nothing. Dr. Mueller wrote these figures and drew a line through them so hard the paper thinned, and his pen tore a little channel that looked like a river he could not cross. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. What frightened the ward more than deaths or rescues were the sentences that arrived without mercy. She repeated a conversation from behind a door, where she could not have stood. She did the voices, and the short laugh of a man who had forgotten he laughed, and the small silence after the use of a name that should not have been spoken there. She recited details from a kitchen that was usually kind, and a quarrel there turned cold. She told a policeman where a ring had been pushed into a pocket of a coat that was not in that house, and the policeman retrieved it and put it in a paper envelope and did not bring it back. She told a neighbor where an infant lay under a square of packed earth with a red ribbon caught in the roots of grass, and the ribbon came up wet and black and still red somewhere at the center, where dye remembers itself. Men who had smiled called her dangerous now. Women who had prayed began to lift their eyes from their stoves when she was near, and then lower them quicker than before. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. The Zimmerman house had a throat that had learned to breathe wrong. Emma walked past and watched the draw and drew it on paper in the kitchen with little arrows and a number under each. She noted the way the suit made a diagonal wound above the stovepipe. She noted the sound the wind made when it traveled up into brick and back. She noted the way Mr. Zimmerman coughed and set his hand against the same place on the wall every time he returned from the yard. She wrote, Mr. Zimmerman drinks lamp oil when the beer runs thin, and his wife has gone to her sister, and the chimney is a mouth that will not hold its tongue when the hour is this, and then she wrote the hour. Dr. Mueller went to the house and spoke as if facts could block a flame. Mr. Zimmerman laughed and swore, and a neighbor nodded to an old song about pride and the way pride likes to live in chimneys. At the named hour, heat ran under shingles, like a snake that knows its burrow, and Mr. Zimmerman went still where the girl had placed him. People did not wave to the Richters after that. Doors closed a little quicker when Emma walked by. The ward learned how to make a face into a lock. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. The policeman who had accepted her whispers began to return things that were not his to return. He came to the Richter door and laid a handkerchief on the table, and said not a word, and backed away, and did not look either of them in the eyes. He wrote a line in his book that said community unrest, and then drew a little box around it, and shut the book as if a box could keep its words from running. He had used her once, and it had given him a small pride, when a small pride could be forgiven. He could not use her again without becoming something he did not wish to be. Stones found the window one night, and one word found the air twice, which in German and in English, and it sounded wrong on both tongues, and yet it was spoken, because fear likes familiar tools. Hinrich stood in the kitchen with his hands on the table, as if to keep the wood from lifting. Greta took down the notebook, and slid it into a space beneath a board, and set the board back and set a cup on it, so that it would look like a place to rest a cup, and nothing else. Emma sat straight, and said, "My head hurts when people move like lies, and if you make them stand still my head stops." Her mother said, "We will go for a few days." Her father said he would speak to the pastor and the doctor and the man who rented him the bench. The pastor closed his study door. The doctor wrote one more page he never published. The landlord changed his lock without saying anything because his hands shook. Dr. Mueller tried to bring the child inside a net he trusted. He asked her to explain the way she made a city into a lattice. She said, "Every walk is a number, and every turn is a habit, and you can watch a person and feel where their habit will place them if the air does not change." She said you can know when a thing has bent, because it will ask for correction, and the body answers the request before the mind does. She said the hours move around like weights on a clock, and the weights can be shifted by tiny touches and noise, and a promise or a lie. He wrote the word sequences and the word loops. He wrote the word compulsion, and then he drew 2 lines through it, and wrote the word hunger instead, because it was cleaner to pretend the city's appetite lived in the child, rather than admit it lived in the city itself. The ward told stories to itself that excused it and condemned it in the same breath. One story said she forced the world by saying it, and if she had held her tongue, Mr. Kellner would have kept his blood, and Mr. Zimmerman his breath, and Mr. Dietrich his watch. Another said she saved more than she cost, and named 3 names of people who had lived past the hours she had written for them, because someone had touched them, or pulled them back, or moved them a little, so that the numbers could not catch. A third said the police, and the doctor, and a neighbor with a moral itch had used her, and then abandoned her, because they had counted the cost and did not like the total. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. The journal that remained after they left is a quiet thing, and it does not glow. It lies flat as a map of streets no cartographer would choose to draw. There are pages of measures that read like prayer. Between door and stoop and curb, and oak barrel and hatch and plank and chimney. There are sketches that show distances between minds, between a promise and a breaking of it, between a look and a hand rising, between a cough and the hour when a lung becomes a room where air no longer wishes to live. There are names written once, and then once more, and then struck as if acknowledging that the page could no longer claim them. The family left before dawn, and did not leave a goodbye behind that anyone would trust. There are 3 versions. One says stones kept them awake, and men with bad words were due to arrive, and the policeman told them to go, and the doctor told them to run, and the pastor told them to find another parish, where little girls are not asked to be clocks. Another says the doctor